And today I'm going to be talking about 8 common trains of thought that can result in potentially costly mistakes when choosing a systematic synthetic phonics program. These are all things that I've either read about on online posts or I have become aware of in conversations with schools. So, number one, here is a train of thought. It would be better to buy a program from one of the big publishers. So I have heard that being said. Some of the smaller or more recently validated programs are just as good as those that have been produced by the big publishing houses. Those programs have all been through the same validation process. So do you think equal opportunities here? Bigger programs are not necessarily going to be the right one for you. Some of the smaller or more recently validated programs have been written by current or former teachers who have successfully used letters and sounds in their classes. Some of the authors have also been consultants for some time who have helped schools to implement particularly letters and sounds successfully. Now, unlike some of the programs that have been in existence for some time, those smaller programs were not necessarily ready to submit their applications to the Department for Education because a lot of work was involved in compiling those programs and getting everything ready as part of that process. And if those programs are successful, they should be just as good as the ones that were already in existence and were ready to go for validation last June. Another thing to think about is that it's potentially you could get more personalised support from some of the smaller or more recently validated programs. Possibly even from the author themselves, and this may not be the case if you choose a program from one of the big publishing houses. Big publishers may want to tie you to the decodable texts which they produce, whereas some of the programs that are not attached to a particular publisher may be able to provide you with a list of texts from different sources that you can choose from. So there is more flexibility and more choice potentially. Okay, the second train of thought is this one. Someone I know has got that program and they like it, so that would be a good one for us to choose too. So a few things to say about that. What program suits one school may not suit another for all sorts of different reasons. So I know of 3 schools who were using one of the first programs that was revalidated in June, and those 3 schools were unhappy with that program for various reasons. In one of the schools, the staff felt quite frustrated because the children were not as engaged in their phonics lessons as they had been when they were using letters and sounds previously. They have since changed to one of the more recently validated programs, and the staff are a lot more enthusiastic because they can see a big improvement. Meanwhile, there are other schools that are signing up to that program that particular school has moved away from. So one size does not fit all. So the third common train of thought. Lots of schools are using that program and they're talking about it online. So that would be a good one for us to choose too. So a few things to say about that. Programs which were validated first will inevitably have more schools using them. So there were some schools who this time last year were very aware that they needed to do something quite urgently to improve their phonics teaching. So they chose to use a program off the list that was published last June. And potentially some schools that were using letters and sounds historically were looking for validated programs that were based on letters and sounds. Now, that doesn't make those programs validated last June any better than any of the more recently validated ones, because all programs have gone through the same process and they've had to achieve the same criteria. Inevitably, the more recently validated programs, and that includes schools that programs that are about to be announced very, very imminently in the next round of validations, are likely to have less schools using them. And therefore, inevitably, you're going to see less posts online about those programs. All the validated programs have got schools that are successfully using them, because that was one of the key criteria. It could just be that those schools are not active on social media. So if you want to find out some feedback about a particular program, contact that program, because they should be able to put you in touch with schools who can give you more information. I've also read online common frustrations staff have with some of the popular programs. So it's not all positive information that you will read about online. Okay, the next common train of thought. I can buy the resources from a validated program and I can save money by not using their training. So training was one of the key criteria in the validation process. You cannot say that you are using a validated program if you are not using the training that that program provides. Now, the cost of ongoing training should be part of your initial decision-making process, and the costs do vary hugely from program to program, but the training is absolutely key in terms of successful implementation. So do consider that. The next common train of thought, we plan to amend one of the programs slightly as we don't wish to do the whole thing. Fidelity to the program is important. So if you're looking at a program and there's something that you don't like, it's probably better for you to choose another program. So for example, I've seen people posting about workbooks. So if you don't want to use workbooks and they are an inherent part of a particular program, then that's probably not the program for you. So the next train of thought, we don't need to consult all the staff when making a decision about which program to use. So a couple of things to say about that. Staff engagement with a program is key to it being successfully implemented. Although it's perfectly possible that you will not get 100% agreement amongst all the staff. So I gave an example earlier where you had frustration amongst the staff with a program that had been imposed, and the improvement in their engagement and motivation to use the program when their wish to change programs was acknowledged and acted upon. I'm also aware of a school within a MAT that had been successfully using an SSP program for some years. But more recently, the MAT had decided that they wanted all their schools to be using the same program, but there was actually no consultation with the staff from that particular school before the final decision was made. And that can lead to issues potentially. So the next train of thought, we have some existing decodable readers, so we need to find a program that is based on those. So I have spoken to the head of one of the English hubs who has said that they are advising schools that they should not be choosing program based on existing reading books. Now, unfortunately, some of the decodable readers that were in existence before the DFE validation process was announced last year were not 100% decodable, despite being advertised as such. So that is a real shame, because obviously choices were limited then, and schools have spent money on those programs. Now, some letters and sounds based programs in particular have been written to fit around those existing texts, and therefore compromises in the program itself have potentially had to be made. So, for example, the inclusion of additional tricky words at some of the earlier stages in order that the program fitted existing readers, and potentially inclusion of graphemes which are in very few words, but which are in some of those existing reading books. And some schools have found this difficult stroke frustrating at the point of teaching. So it's really important that before making a decision, you look in detail at any modifications programs have made, particularly the letters and sounds based programs, modifications made to the existing letters and sounds, just to check that those modifications will work for your children. Before you make a commitment to that program, because I am reading online frustrations that staff are having with some of the details within some of the programs that have been chosen. No reading books last forever. So you want to choose a program that is right for your school overall, and not just because it uses your existing reading books. Now, I'm conscious that obviously budgets are tight and you do want to make use of readers that you have. If a program doesn't mention the existing reading books you have, contact them to see if they could still be matched. It doesn't mean they can't be, but you need to ask the question, because it would be far better to use them than to have to throw them away. However, you possibly will still need to buy additional titles to plug any gaps that there may be. And the last train of thought, I need to have a validated program in place for this September. So a few things to say about that. I'm conscious that some local authorities have been putting pressure on schools to use a validated program. I'm also aware of a head teacher that resisted that pressure and wrote back to their local authority to explain the rationale behind their decision not to use a validated program. And actually the local authority backed off straight away. So don't feel pressurized by your local authority if it's not the right thing for you to do. If all your children are doing well with what you are currently using and you have matching reading books, there is no need for you to spend lots of money buying into a validated program. Ofsted have confirmed this, and I've spoken to a head teacher who has recently been on Ofsted training, and this message was part of that Ofsted training. I'm continuing to see rumours online about this magic percentage that Ofsted are allegedly looking for in terms of phonics screening check results. Ofsted have confirmed that there is no percentage they are looking for. If you go onto the blog on my website, or you can check in the video section on my Facebook page, there is a video in which I read out Ofsted's response, so you can actually sort of hear it directly from them. We are all aware that one school's experience of an Ofsted early reading deep dive may not be the same as another school's experience in terms of what inspectors are looking for. As in all aspects of Ofsted inspections, unfortunately, it does appear to be down to the luck of the team that you are allocated. And that's the same, not just for early reading, but for other aspects of inspections at all. In a little online survey I did earlier this year, I asked schools who had had a recent inspection how many of those inspectors were expecting to see a validated program, and the response was about 50-50. What you do need to be able to do is, if you are sticking with your own program, you've got to be able to show it is effective and that you have matching readers, and be prepared to stand your ground and argue your case in the event of an inspection. Also bear in mind that the final list of validated programs for the time being will not now be published until mid-autumn term. So the perfect program for you may not appear until then. So if you haven't seen anything that you particularly like to date, then you may well do well to wait for that list to come out, and then you can see what all your options are. So please, 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 please be aware of thoughts that you may have that may be leading potentially or could potentially lead to a decision that might not be the right one for your school. I hope you found that useful.